Zohran Mamdani has a vision for New York's housing crisis: freeze rents, expand tenant protections, and shift power away from landlords. To his supporters, it's a lifeline for working-class New Yorkers. To his critics, it's an economic time bomb that could shrink the housing supply. So, will Mamdani's plan save tenants or exasperate the housing crisis? By calling for a freeze on rents in stabilized units, Mamdani aims to give tenants immediate relief and curb the steady erosion of affordability. Rent controls sound like a silver bullet for lowering the cost of living, but in practice they often do the opposite because they tackle prices without addressing supply. A freeze would set a cap on the rent a landlord could charge, but doesn't address the inflation in operational costs. In the 2025 New York City RGB Price Index of Operating Costs, the cost for rent stabilized units for 2024 to 25 was 6.3%. During this same period, the rent increase on a one-year lease would be 2.75%. Landlords unable to recoup operating expenses from rent will likely choose to defer repairs. Over time, this can lower the quality of rent-controlled housing without actually making the city cheaper to live in. You just get cheaper, worse housing. In a meta-study published in the Journal of Housing Economics, which aggregates 112 empirical published studies, found that the published studies are almost unanimous with respect to the impact of rent control on the quality of housing. All studies, except for Gilderbloom, 1986, and Gilderbloom and Markham, 1996, indicate that rent control leads to a deterioration in the quality of those dwellings subject to regulations. The landlords, whose revenues are eroded by rent control, have reduced incentives to invest in maintenance and refurbishment. Thus, they let their properties wear out until the real value of the dwellings decreases and becomes equal to the low real rent. Rent freezes would also increase rents in the unregulated market. Operating pressures would cause many to choose to convert regulated units to condos or co-ops, keep them vacant, or stop investing in new rental construction. This creates a downward pressure on the supply of rent-frozen units while increasing the demand for these units. Landlords who own both controlled and uncontrolled units may have to increase rents on the uncontrolled units to make up the deficit on the controlled ones. What we end up with is a lottery system, since the controlled units are underpriced to market value. Renters who have won the lottery will tend to hold on to these units, further limiting the stock available to new renters through natural turnover. The excess demand gets pushed into the unregulated market, pushing up those prices. Any increased demand is unlikely to be met with increased supply, since Zohran is looking to expand rent stabilization to all new production. Mamdani is part of NYC's progressive movement, often aligned with Democratic Socialists of America. His housing platform sees housing as a human right, with the state playing a larger role in protecting tenants and providing housing, similar in principle to Vienna's social housing model. But Vienna doesn't freeze rents. It instead sets rents at cost. Rents are set to cover construction costs, financing, and ongoing maintenance. Rent stays in line with inflation, ensuring rental income is enough to maintain the housing units. Instead of freezing, Vienna is able to reduce rents by addressing the operating expenses. The city and large housing associations bulk purchase materials, paint, plumbing supplies, fixtures, and tender contracts to maintenance firms in bulk. This scale lowers per-unit costs and allows for standardized, cost-efficient repairs. Landlords must also maintain a reserve fund specifically for upkeep, with the contributions built into the rent. Also, a major reason for rents being low in Vienna are construction costs. Vienna owns most of the land new housing is built on, which is then leased cheaply to non-profit developers through a competitive tender system. This keeps land costs low. While in New York City, these would account for about 20 to 25% of the total construction costs. Vienna also does this at scale, with the city being the largest landowner, accounting for almost half of the total land. Zohran has indicated increasing affordable housing on city-owned land, but it's unclear how much of this is available for new housing construction. So while it's a sensible step, it's unclear how much of the housing demand this would satisfy. Another contributing factor to sky-high rents are zoning laws. Even though the Big Apple is famous for skyscrapers, in reality, about 70% of its residential land is zoned to ban new multifamily housing. Tokyo solved its similar housing issues following a market-based strategy by simply improving zoning laws and reducing red tape. Japan's national land use laws override local NIMBY resistance, allowing denser housing almost everywhere. Land near transit is widely available for multifamily, because zoning allows it. The result? Less artificial scarcity, so land prices per unit of housing don't skyrocket the way they do in New York. Building codes are strict on earthquake safety, but otherwise streamlined and uniform nationwide. Construction approvals often take a few months versus years in New York. Even though land in central Tokyo is very expensive, the ability to build up or densify means costs are spread across many units. Since supply keeps up with demand, rents in Tokyo have remained stable or even declined in real terms. Japan provides some social housing, but the private sector handles most of the supply. Zohran has stated of adopting something similar with increased housing near transit lines and improving bureaucracy, but community resistance has long been a major challenge for high-density housing in New York. While Zohran's policies do have some focus on increasing housing supply, the rent freeze is going to be a major impediment. Even with Mamdani's stated plans to raise $70 billion on the municipal bond market to build 200,000 new units over 10 years. This still falls short of the required housing supply estimates at 500,000 units. Despite his ambitious socialist policies, Mamdani will need to work with the private sector to meet the 300,000 units of demand. Rent freezes without any policies to control operating costs will only spook real estate investors. Even affordable housing schemes subsidized by the city only provide low-cost financing while landlords retain the operating risks. A rent freeze, or even the fear of a rent freeze, would make real estate a riskier investment, further suppressing future supply. It's likely renters in stabilized units could benefit from lower rents but lower quality housing, and tenants in the market-priced units will likely see rents increase. The freeze can be seen as a short-term relief, but it would have a greater impact in supply falling short of demand. Both the Vienna and Tokyo models work because of their ability to match housing supply to the demand from new tenants, whether it is done by the public or private sector. Thanks for watching. If you found this helpful, click that like button and subscribe for more videos on financial concepts.